Yes, I was on time today.
Already abandoned your new magical powers from last video?
I did, after I realized that there is something more useful than magic.
Which is?
A gun. I think the Harry Potter books would have ended rather quickly if one of the students was American.
Well, this might come a bit out of nowhere, but for how late and annoying you were the last videos, I had another Pio cloned.
Not again.
Say hi to evil Pio.
Hi. Hi! He doesn't look that evil. What makes him evil? I like paying taxes. This isn't a Pio. This is a monster. Get the Holy Flamer. We must get rid of this abomination at once. I don't like violence. I will deal with him.
No remorse, no mercy, no forgiveness. Not a single step back, not a single moment of hesitation. You will not succumb to fear or doubt, and you will relent only after you have given your last moment for the Emperor. I hope you appreciated those moments of levity, because there will be very few going onward.
Good to know, but before we start, I must ask. Are the Lamenters involved in any way in this story?
No, Pio, their kind of depression is better left for larger videos.
Phew! My boys are safe for another day.
Now, I'll make it short because it is a short video, which is by design. Because I might go crazy if I end up having to edit another video that is over 1 hour long for the 5th month in a row. Next video will be back to normal levels of autism. As usual, we want to thank the members of our Discord, of our Patreon, and the members of the YouTube channel for their support. The Supporters exclusive series of Lord Destroyers is going forward on Patreon. And as promised, we are editing the first of the best-ofs for YouTube, covering the first 4 episodes. So, just have a bit of patience, it is a lot of footage. Now, there is a broad spectrum of depressing stories in 40k, and I am a fan of pretty much all of them. The depressing story of a forgotten war that is being fought by the protagonist of 15 Hours, the depressive story of Dante, the oldest and most depressed space marine alive, that wants to die just so he can rest and have peace. The story of Andre from the Book of Elsrich.
Your friend, your love. Did you find her? Yes. I did find her.
But these stories have one thing in common. They are all stories about good people suffering for the actions of others. For the actions of the enemy, of the bad guy of a given situation. What elevates the story I will present to you today on a higher level than all of those is that in this story, the bad guy is also the victim of the story. See, while I was researching the Eisenhorn trilogy for the last video about Pontius Glow, I took up and read the Eisenhorn Omnibus. Now, the Omnibus might have some stuff wrong, like I said in that video, but one thing I didn't know is that the Omnibus also contained Eisenhorn's short stories, his adventures in between the main books. Obviously, I read all of them, like a good lore master should do. And thanks to Lord Destroyers, I am learning more and more that the others do not read anything at all before making lore videos. Fucking Christ. Major Kill, I can understand that you have, like, no kind of fucking commitment to the lore with 700k subscribers. You can say whatever the fuck you want, and people will believe you, because rule of numbers. But for real, you couldn't be bothered to read the 2 fucking pages. We are at that level now. But that is an argument for another day. Or next video. We'll see. There were only 2 short stories in the Omnibus, and they were decently sized, but still, just a minor fraction of the main books. The second one, taking place after the second book, backlot for a Crown additional, while cool in premise, is pretty forgettable. But I didn't expect at all what I would find when I read the first one. You see, there is a short story placed chronologically between the events of the first and the second book. Its name is missing in action. And in my opinion, it is at the same time one of the best and the most overlooked short stories in all of Warhammer 40.000. I am not an easily moved person when it comes to books. It is very hard for me to be touched by something to the point of feeling deeply sorry for a fictional character. But this short story did it, and that is the reason I decided to present it to all of you. I hope you are not easily impressionable, as while it isn't the most violent of stories of 40k, it is in my opinion one of the most grounded in reality. And it deals with something that is barely touched in 40k, almost as much as it seems disregarded in real life. The concept of PTSD. Let's not waste any more time. This is the story of Missing in Action. The story opens on the planet of Sameter, specifically in the city of Urbitane. Sameter is a declining agrochemical planet in the Helican subsector. Eisenhorn was on the planet for 3 weeks, investigating a link between a bonded trade federation and a secessionist movement on Esperus, at the request of Lord Inquisitor Rorken. On the 13th day of Sagittar, don't ask because I don't know what date that will be, an itinerant evangelist called Laszlo Mombril was found shuffling aimlessly around the flat roof of a disused tannery, lacking his eyes, his tongue, his nose, and both of his hands. Now, the city of Urbitane was no stranger to crimes of cruelty and spite between people, but this act of barbarity stood out for 2 reasons. The first one was that it was not blooded assault or alcohol-fueled manslaughter, but a deliberate and systematic act of brutal, almost ritual mutilation. And the second reason is that it was the 4th such crime discovered that month alone. This was supposed to be an easy assignment for Eisenhorn, given to him by Lord Rorken to recover after the events of the Necroturk. Remember, this short story takes place not long after the first book, but before the second. In fact, the date of these events is 241 and 41. But as Eisenhorn was preparing to leave the planet, officials of the Munitorum of the World requested an audience directly with the Inquisitor. Minister Ansard, the Minister of Security of Urbitane, reached Gregor Eisenhorn in the suit that he had requisitioned for his stay. The minister believed that the deaths were not only connected, but they smelled of warp corruption, and needed immediate investigation to find the culprits and punish them. He then was handed a detailed report about all 4 cases.
I began to speed read the slate, already preparing the gentle knockback I was expecting to give to his case. Then I stopped. Slowed, read back. I felt a curious mix of elation and frustration. Even from this cursorial glance, there was no doubt this case required the immediate attention of the Imperial Inquisition. I could feel my instincts stiffen and my appetites wetten for the first time in months. In bothering me with this, Minister Hansard was not being over careful at all. At the same time, my heart sank with the realization that my departure from this miserable city would be delayed.
All the victims showed similar processes of mutilation. They had been blinded, their nose, tongue and hands removed in all of the cases. The evangelist, Mombril, was the only one to be found alive, and he died of his injuries just 8 minutes after arriving at Urbitane mid-rise sector infirmary. Eisenhorn theorized that he had escaped before his tormentors could finish their work. The other 3 victims were Paul Grevan, a machinesmith, Luther Hewall, a ragmaker, and Edelaine Faspol, a midwife. Hewall was found in the sewers, his body having been burned and then flushed into the sewage system. Edelaine was found under the roof of a mid-rise tenement hub. She had been mutilated in the same manner, but had also her brain, brainstem and heart removed. Her body was desiccated in that crawl space. Graven was found in the waters of the bay. The Arbites had ruled that he had taken his own life, and was mutilated by a passing ship while in the bay. They had all died fairly recently, and the theory of the Arbites at first was that they had a serial killer going around. But the pattern of mutilation gave the idea of a ritualistic killing more than a mindless one. And the pattern of all of these deaths created an even more sinister suspicion that there were even more bodies that had yet to be found. To the dismay of Eisenhorn, that hated the city and the planet, he would be forced to stay and begin investigation into this theorized Chaos Cult, to try and purge it before it could do even graver damage to more people, or conjure rituals that could doom the planet itself.
I just want to point out that Eisenhorn is an Inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, and yet, the majority of his story is him dealing with heretics and demons.
Now, the story of the investigation is pretty contorted, so I will give you a short summary of it. In their investigation, Eisenhorn and his retinue will discover various things. The first was that all of the deceased seemed to have inhabited an extremely specific area, and what I mean by that is that they all lived in the same neighborhood, mere streets apart. And by insight of Godwin Fishig, this meant that the killer was a local too. After that discovery, they were called again. 3 more bodies discovered in an old warehouse in the mill zone, still in the same section of the hive where the killings had taken place. The building was being demolished after a fire, and they found the bodies behind the wall insulation of the structure. A woman and 2 men, same mutilations of all others. But they were much older than the other victims. All 3 of the bodies, as confirmed from the Examiner Medicae, were there from at least 8 years, and each one had been there for different lengths of time. At that point, they returned to the tannery where Mombril had been found, to find out more details about what could have happened to the man. They noticed that the man could have not reached the roof by himself in that state, but the windows of the tall warehouse next to the building were shattered. They interpreted that the man was fleeing blindly in the warehouse, and ended up falling through the windows and to the roof where he was found. Eisenhorn and his retinue reached the warehouse, forced it open, and armed themselves before entering. In one of the rooms of the last floors, they found a sheet of plastic spread on the ground, smeared with old blood and other organic deposits. But remarkably, if this is the place where Mombril was mutilated, there was a total lack of cult markings or chaos symbology. But as they kept exploring the warehouse, somebody found them, and a gunfight erupted without warning.
Fischig had reached the top of the staircase. He peered down, aiming his weapon. Last fire erupted through the floorboards next to him, and he threw himself flat. I put a trio of shots into the mouth of the staircase, but my angle was bad. 2 hard round shots spat back up the stairs, and then the roar and flash of the last came again, raking the floor. From above, I realized belatedly. Whoever was on the stairs had a hard slug sidearm, but the last fire was coming down from the roof. I heard steps running on the floor below. Fischig scrambled up to give chase, but another salve of last fire sent him ducking again. I raised my aim and fired up into the roof tiles, blowing out holes through which the pale light poked. Some things leaded and scrambled on the roof. Fischig was on the stairs now, running after the second assailant. I hurried across the 3rd floor, following the sounds of the man on the roof. I saw a silhouette against the sky through a hole in the tiles and fired again. Last fires replied in a bright burst, but then there was a thump and further slithering. "Cease fire! Give yourself up! Inquisition!" I bellowed, using the will. There came a much more substantial crash, sounding like a whole portion of the roof had come down. Tiles avalanched down and smashed in a room nearby. I slammed into the doorway, gun aimed, about to yell out a further will command, but there was no one in the room. Piles of shattered roof slates and bricks covered the floor beneath a gaping hole in the roof itself, and the battered last rifle lay amongst the debris. On the far side of the room were some of the broken windows the Bee Queen had pointed out as overlooking the tannery roof. I ran to one. Down below, a powerful figure in dark overalls was running for cover. The killer escaping from me in just the same way his last victim had escaped him, through the windows onto the tannery roof. The distance was too far to use the will again with any effect, but my aim and angle were good. I lined up on the back of the head a second before it disappeared, began to apply pressure, and the world exploded behind me.
When Eisenhorn awoke in Bekin's arms, he learned that the gun abandoned by the fleeing man was booby-trapped. The power cell was overloaded on purpose. The weapon had turned into a bomb. But Fischig managed to get the other attacker, killed with the help of Captain Vrex, the Arbati helping in the investigation. The investigation was still proceeding, and here they will find out that both the warehouse and the agricultural store had 2 people that work in them for the same periods of the killings, Brel Sodakis and Vin Venik. Both worked as warehousemen before the place closed down, and were now employed by Handolma's agricultural stowage. At this point, even Eisenhorn was doubting that this could be a cult. Too much was out of place, and there were no signs of chaos corruption anywhere that they had seen. One interesting detail, though, was discovered on the remains of the last rifle that had exploded as a trap for Eisenhorn. It was an old model las rifle, but the trigger guard had been modified. In opinion of Fischig, the trigger guard was machine-tooled to widen the guard around the trigger, for easier use by people with augmetic hands with rudimentary digits. On the body of the attacker killed instead, they will discover a tattoo, an Imperial Eagle, with the marking of SIIX. Interpreted, it meant Cemetery Infantry 9. This man was an Imperial Guardsman.
The 9th Sameter Infantry had been founded in Urbitane 23 years before, and had served, as Amos had already told me, in the brutal Liberation War on Surrealis 6. According to city records, 519 veterans of that war and their regiment had been repatriated to Sameter after mustering out 13 years ago, coming back from the horrors of war to an increasingly depressed world, beset by the blight of poverty and urban collapse. Their regimental emblem, as befitted a world once dominated by agriculture, was the wheat ear. They came back 13 years ago. The oldest victim we have dates from that time, said Fishig. Surrealis 6 was a hard campaign, wasn't it? I asked. Amos nodded.
The enemy was dug in. It was ferocious, brutal, brutalizing. And the climate... 2 white dwarf suns, no cloud cover, the most punishing heat and light, not to mention ultraviolet burning.
Amos had already compiled a list of the veterans. Brel Sodakis and Vin Venik were on it. They too were veteran guardsmen from the campaign of Surrealis 6. And from here, the story goes from being a generic story of investigation and intrigue, to touching on a subject so delicate that I've seen very few writers of 40k even address.
So these men and women made us mused. Soldiers, been through hell, fighting the corruption. Your idea is they brought it back here with them. Some taint. You think they were infected by the touch of the warp on Surrealis and have been ritually killing as a way of worship back here ever since?
No, I said. I think they're still fighting the war. It remains a sad truth of the Imperium that virtually no veterans ever comes back from fighting its wars intact. Combat alone shreds nerves and shatters bodies, but the horrors of the warp and the foul Xenos forms like the Tyranid steal sanity forever and leave veterans fearing the shadows and the night, and sometimes the nature of their friends and neighbors for the rest of their lives. The gods of the 9th Sameter Infantry had come home 13 years before, broke by a savage war against mankind's archenemy, and through their scars and their fear, brought their war back with them. The Arbiters mounted raids at once on the addresses of all the veterans on the list, those that could be traced, those that were still alive. It appeared that skin cancer had taken over 200 of them in the years since their repatriation. Surrealis had claimed them as surely as if they had fallen there in combat. A number were rounded up, bewildered drunks, cripples, addicts, a few honest men and women trying diligently to carry on with their lives. For those latter, I felt especially sorry. But about 70 could not be traced. Many may well have disappeared, moved on or died without it coming to the attention of the authorities. But some had clearly fled. Lund, Traves, Sodakis, Vanik for starters. Their habs were found abandoned, strewn with possessions as if the occupant had left in a hurry. So were the habs of 20 more belonging to names on the list. The Arbiters arrived at the hab of one ex-corporal Geffin Sancto, in time to catch him in the act of flight. Sancto had been a flamer operator in the guard, and like so many of his kind, had managed to keep his weapon as a memento. Screaming the battle cry of the Sameter 9th, he torched 4 Arbiters in the stairwell of his building before the tactical squad of the Judiciary vaporized him in a hail of gunshots.
Eisenhorn would theorize that these soldiers were so broken that they were still seeing chaos and corruption everywhere. They had been killing people they thought were traitors and heretics, just preparing to assault their home. They took the eyes, the hands, and the tongue, all organs of communication, to deprive the archenemy of spreading his lies. They then destroyed the brain and the heart, organs that a common soldier myth declares must harbor demons. An hunch of Eisenhorn will guide him to the guild hall of the Sameter Agricultural Fraternity, a massive building that was now disused. Its last duty had been to serve as a recruitment post of the Sameter 9th during the founding of the regiment. Eisenhorn, his retinue, and 3 fire teams of heavily armed Arbeitis arrived at the building. But at first, only Eisenhorn, Midas, and Fishig went inside. Inside the building, Eisenhorn could hear singing. A couple of dozen voices voicing up the battle hymn of the Golden Throne. When Eisenhorn and his retinue managed to establish visual, they could see 23 disheveled veterans in ragged clothes, kneeling down in ranks on the filthy floor, their heads bowed to the rusty Imperial Eagle hanging on the wall as they sang. Each veteran had a backpack or rucksack, and all had weapons by their feet.
My heart ached. This was how it had gone over 2 decades before, when they came to the service, young and fresh and eager, before the war, before the horror. Let me try to give them a chance, I said. Gregor, Midas hissed. Let me try for their sake, cover me. I slipped into the back of the hole, my gun lowered at my side and joined in the verse. One by one, the voices died away and bowed heads turned sideways to look at me. Down the aisle, at the chalk cross of the altar, Lund, Traves, and the bearded man I didn't know stood gazing at me. In the absence of other voices, I finished the hymn. It's over, I said. The war is over and you have all done your duty, above and beyond the call. Silence. I am Inquisitor Eisenhorn. I'm here to relieve you. The careful war against the blight of chaos that you have waged through your Urbitain secret is now over. The Inquisition is here to take over. You can stand down. 2 or 3 of the hunched veterans began to weep.
You lie,
said Lund, stepping forward. I do not. Surrender your weapons and I promise you will be treated fairly and with respect.
Will we get medals?
The bearded man asked in a quavering voice. The gratitude of the God Emperor will be with you always. More were weeping now, out of fear, anxiety or plain relief. Don't trust him, said Traves. It's another trick.
I saw you in my bar.
Said Lund, stepping forward.
You came in, looking.
Her voice was empty, distant. I saw you on the tannery roof, Omin Lund. You're still a fine shot, despite the hand. She looked down at her prosthetic with a wince of shame.
Will we get medals?
The bearded man repeated eagerly. Traves turned on him. Of course we want Spake, you cretin. He's here to kill us.
I want medals!
The bearded man, Spake, screamed suddenly, sliding his last pistol up from his belt with the fluid speed only a trained soldier can manage. I had no choice. His shot tore through the shoulder padding of my stormcoat. My bolt exploded his head, spraying blood across the rusty metal eagle on the wall. Pandemonium. The veterans leapt to their feet, firing wildly, scattering, running. I threw myself flat as shots tore out the wall plaster behind me. At some point, Fishing and Midas burst in, weapons blazing. I saw 3 or 4 veterans drop, sliced through by sullen needles, and another 6 stumble as shotgun rounds blew them apart. Traves came down the aisle, blasting his old service issue las rifle at me. I rolled and fired, but my shot went wide. His face distorted as a needle round punched through it and he fell in a crumpled heap. Wrecks and FI teams exploded in. Flames from some spilled accelerants billowed up the wall. I got up, and then was thrown back by a last shot that blew off my left hand. Spinning, falling. I saw Lund struggling to make her prosthetic fingers work the unmodified trigger of Travis's last gun. My bolt round hit her with such force she flew back down the aisle, hit the wall and tore the Imperial Aquila down. Not a single veteran escaped the Guildhall alive. The firefight raged for 2 hours. Rex lost 5 men to the experienced guns of the Sameter 9th veterans. They stood to the last. No more can be said of any Imperial Guard unit. The whole affair left me sour and troubled. I have devoted my life to the service of the Imperium, to protect it against its manifold foes inside and out, but not against its servants. However misguided, they were loyal and true. However wrong, they were shaped that way by the service they had endured in the Emperor's name. Lund cost me my hand. A hand for a hand. They gave me a prosthetic on Sameter. I never used it. For 2 years I made do with a fused stump. Surgeons on Messina finally gave me a fully functional graft. I consider it still a small price to pay for them. I have never been back to Sameter. Even today they are still finding the secreted hidden bodies. So very many dead in the Emperor's name.
This story is magnificent in my opinion. It shows you the humanity of these soldiers, of the people of the Imperium in 40k. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a brutal condition that many people suffer in real life when they come back from the battlefields of countless wars and skirmishes. It is very easy to make you feel empathetic towards a good character in impossible odds, but I find that this story does something much harder. It makes you feel empathetic towards broken people, normal everyday individuals thrown in an impossible situation, and that simply had no way to readjust to civilian life after having fought against chaos and the enemies of the Imperium. Yes, they are responsible of extremely brutal acts against innocent people, but no care was given to them. They came back as the last survivors of their now defunct regiment, and were simply abandoned to their fate on the planet. Those that did not die for the cancer developed from fighting in such an inhospitable environment like Surrealis became addicts, drunks, cripples, unable to deal with the horrors they had seen, and now were people without purpose, left to their own devices without really knowing what to do.
They trained us to kill people and risk our lives doing it. And then one day you get a call saying they're done with you. Thank you for your service. Here's a plaque. You need a job? Good luck. You need medical insurance? See the VA. One day you're an asset, the next you're a fucking afterthought.
Now, I suspect many people will in a way complain about the title of this video, as it is obviously titled as the most depressing story in Warhammer 40.000. That is obviously subjective. For some, other stories might be more depressing. Some will agree with me, and that is totally fine. We are all different people that get emotional about different things, but to be honest, this story for me is so special because it gives a new meaning to in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. These men and women were still acting out of loyalty to the Imperium and the Emperor. They were still fighting in his name against the enemies they were programmed to recognize and kill on sight. Consider them guilty or not for their actions, but there is only one truth in this matter. These soldiers were broken souls unable to live peaceful lives. Because even if they came back and tried to readjust to a normal life, in their minds and souls, they were still on the battlefields of a war. They simply never left.